Why do you declare 2016 as the year of Orwellian manipulation, and what does this mean for ordinary South Africans as well as our politics?
I think in the battle between political interests in the ANC and in the state, and between those in the state and in the ANC, 2016 for me was quite a bad year because the casualty was the truth. It seemed all of them were intent on attacking the truth through Orwellian manipulation. In other words, what they were trying to do is to present falsehoods as truths and truths as falsehoods, depending on what needed to be achieved in relation to their political opponents. And that is why I spent the entire year saying the battles between protagonists in the state or in the ANC, or protagonists in battles between elements in the state and the ANC, are not reducible to angels and devils. I kept on talking about how these battles were battles between angels with horns and devils with halos, because I was afraid that all the sides in these battles were succeeding in presenting half-truths and lies about their opponents as truths, and truths that were inconvenient about them as lies.
How was the media the main theater of Orwellian manipulation in South Africa?
Well, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, our political discourse takes place mainly in the media, takes place mainly through the media. And I think to the extent that I've identified Orwellian manipulation as the main feature of political battles in 2016, I think the protagonists identified the media as a target. They decided that through the media, they would try and disadvantage their opponents, and therefore the media became a medium for the distortion of truth and for purveying lies as truths. Unfortunately, in some cases, some sections of the media and some journalists were not reporting the political story, but became part of the political story when they chose sides in battles between elements inside and outside the ANC.
Why did you choose President Jacob Zuma and Finance Minister Pravin Gordhan as the best fitting example of Orwellian manipulation?
I think the biggest story of 2016 started on the 9th of December 2015, when President Jacob Zuma fired Nhlanhla Nene as finance minister. And after he was forced to fire Des van Rooyen and appoint Pravin Gordhan in his place, we saw a turning point, not only in ANC politics, but a turning point with regard to the political environment around the president. And that turning point manifested quite clearly in the outcome of the local government elections, to the extent that while the president was not the sole reason the ANC suffered so badly in the local government elections, but he was one of the main factors through his image crisis causing collateral damage to the ANC, which caused the ANC to suffer such electoral losses. And if you agree with me that Pravin Gordhan is de facto the president of South Africa, and Jacob Zuma, de jure, the president of South Africa, what people called a proxy battle between Zuma and Gordhan, for me was a key battle, or even the most important political battle in 2016. And it forced the country, it forced the media, it forced political parties to take sides between the two men. Because according to them, you were either choosing to be with Jacob Zuma, meaning you were supporting corruption, lack of good governance, systemic, not just endemic corruption in the state, a corruption of the ANC's values and principles. On the other hand, if you were supporting Pravin Gordhan, you were supporting someone who was acting in the national interest, someone who was acting in the interests of the economy, and someone who was acting in pursuit of good governance. And therefore, you were either, in the case of Jacob Zuma, supporting the devil, and in the case of Pravin Gordhan, the devil. And that was Orwellian to me, because the truth is much more complicated than that. But what both sides achieved is to show once again that in politics, reality is created through both lies and the truth. And the fact that the best lies are those with a bit of truth in them.
Aubrey, you also mentioned that the Guptas are the biggest problem when it comes to state capture facing South Africa. Why?
Well, I actually say the opposite. If in the column that's what I said, my finger typed the wrong letters. I actually say the Guptas are not the biggest problem when it comes to state capture. I say that they are the tip of the iceberg. It's what I've been saying actually throughout the year, that actually we are facing a much bigger problem. So when we look at state capture, or the state of capture, as the former public protector calls it, in the context of what is alleged against the Guptas, we must put that in a broader context. The broader context for me is that what needs to be captured is not just the state. What needs to be captured are entire countries and entire regions. So the dominant geostrategic, geopolitical, geoeconomic interests in the world will try to make sure that entire regions, entire countries are part of their sphere of influence. If you reduce it to a smaller scale, at the level of the national state, an attempt will be made both by national interests and extra-national interests outside the country to capture the state. Now, in the case of what is being alleged against the Guptas, if all the allegations are true, and it is inconceivable as far as I'm concerned that all of them are true, just as it is inconceivable that all of them are false. So to the extent that some of the allegations against the Guptas are true, the Guptas are a problem. They are distorting public policy outcomes. They have captured elements in the ANC and in the state in a manner that distorts the policy outcomes of the post-apartheid government and the post-apartheid state. But they are not the biggest problem in this regard. We have had this problem, as far as I'm concerned, since before 1994, when the dominant interest in the South African economy during apartheid identified correctly that the ANC would emerge as the winner in post-apartheid elections, and therefore identified elements within the ANC that needed to be captured, and through them distort public policy to their advantage. So people tend to argue, for instance, that white capital does not depend on tenders. The Guptas do depend on tenders and government contracts, and therefore, because white capital does not depend on tenders and government contracts, it is not involved in state capture. That argument itself is Orwellian, because capture is not only about tenders and contracts. It is also about capturing the policy space. It is about making sure that you capture people within the state so that in policy terms they are aligned to your logic, so that the policy outcomes are consistent with your own interests and goals. And to a large extent, those sections of white capital that have been doing this have succeeded as far as capturing the policy space is concerned, and less so with regard to government contracts and tenders. Now, you will say to me, where is the evidence And I will say to you, well, absence of evidence is not always evidence of absence.
You also say that state of capture has been with us since 1994. You described it as a formal and non-formal arrangement that some of the ANC leaders entered into with some sections of white capital. Is it then correct to blame the ruling party for the state capture in our country?
Well, I also say in the column that one of the problems we face as far as state capture is concerned is that the South African state, the post-apartheid state, was made available by elements within the ANC, within the ruling party for capture. So you had informal and non-formal relationships. The language that was used in the 90s to describe this relationship said that accommodations were entered into between certain economic interests in South Africa, particularly those that were dominant during apartheid, and some leaders of the ANC, to make sure that whatever policies were adopted by the ANC, if they were progressive, the outcomes would be inconsistent with the progressive nature of the policies, but would be consistent with the goals of these economic interests. If they were not progressive, they were conservative, that would not be a problem because inherently they would be consistent with the goals of these economic interests in our national space. And therefore, for me, the problem in part is that some leaders of the ANC did make the post-apartheid state available for capture. Is that the same as saying they sold out? My view is that yes, you can go that route. You can go the route of accusing them of selling them out. Or you can stop idealizing the ANC and therefore stop idealizing leaders of the ANC and accept that within the ANC you have those who ideologically are in concert with the ideological orientation of those elements in our economy that were dominant during apartheid. So in that sense, you have a synergy ideologically between some parts of the ANC and some parts of white capital. In that case, you don't talk about selling out, but what you do talk about is the fact that the ANC in part is characterized by ideological tensions between its different ideological strands. And therefore the ideological strand that was aligned to the policy and ideological logic of sections of white capital became dominant.
In the end of your piece, you say we must not continue doing what we did in 2016, which involves reducing lies and the truth to how information, facts and ideas makes us feel. What exactly should be done?
You see a headline in the newspaper saying or suggesting that the Guptas are guilty of corruption. And another suggesting that Pravin Gordhan is guilty of having formed a rogue unit within SARS when he was SARS commissioner. What we tend to do in South Africa is not to worry about whether that information or that allegation is true or not. What is uppermost in our minds is how it makes us feel. If the allegation that Pravin Gordhan set up a rogue unit unlawfully in SARS makes us feel bad, then that allegation must be false. If it makes us feel good, then it must be true. And that's what we spent 2016 doing. We were not concerned with whether an allegation is true or not, whether a fact is true or not, whether a piece of information is true or not. We were more concerned with how it makes us feel. If it makes us feel good inside, it is true. If it makes us feel bad inside, it is not true. Which means we have reached a point in our politics, and it's going to be worse in 2017, because you're going to see more, not less, Orwellian manipulation in 2016, because the succession battle is going to kick up a gear. So what are we going to do in 2017 if we don't stop this tendency? When asked whether the end justifies the means, we are going to argue that it depends on whether the end or the outcome is consistent with my preference. So if the outcome is what I like, then the end justifies the means. If the outcome is something that I do not like, it doesn't. So what may happen, which did happen to some extent in 2016, when people stand up screaming democracy, screaming the rule of law, and things like that, we don't question their motives, and we don't question whether their motives are pure or mixed, a mixture of the noble and ignoble, simply because what they are saying makes us feel good inside. So all I'm calling for is that when we receive facts, when we receive allegations, when we receive information, what we must test is whether an allegation, a fact, or information is true or false, not whether it makes me feel good or bad.
Lastly, we have a few organizations and South Africans who have been calling for our President Jacob Zuma to step down. It looks like he is not feeling under pressure. Why?
Well, if he is not feeling under pressure, he is out of touch. Because in my view, the last meeting of the National Executive Committee of the ANC, at which meeting Derek Anakom, the tourism minister, called for him to step down as head of state. If that meeting is anything to go by, that meeting was a turning point. And it suggests to me that the number of people, of ANC leaders in the NEC who want President Jacob Zuma to go has been increasing, while the number of those wanting him to stay has been decreasing. Remember that a year ago, no one would have dared to stand up at an NEC meeting and propose a motion for President Jacob Zuma to step down as head of state. Even 3 months ago, that would not have been possible. The fact that it did happen a few weeks ago does suggest to me that things are shifting inside the leadership structures of the ANC. And I do suspect that things are shifting more significantly outside the NEC of the ANC. In other words, shifts are more significant within the ANC, outside the National Executive Committee, and within society than they are in the National Executive Committee itself. So there is quite a possibility that the president and those who support him may make the mistake of thinking the balance of support within the NEC, shifting or not, represents the balance of support in the ANC as a whole. It may not be. The two may not be properly aligned in the interests of Jacob Zuma and those who support him. But more importantly, there is an extent to which it may no longer matter. That is, what is happening inside the ANC, the dynamics inside the ANC, may actually matter less than dynamics outside the ANC. And if we look at the August election outcome more carefully, it does suggest that we do run the risk of focusing too narrowly on the succession battle, when in the end, the succession battle may prove to be irrelevant because the ANC may lose the 2019 election. So if the ANC loses the 2019 election, the succession battle doesn't matter, because the next head of state may not be from the ANC. And therefore, it may not matter, therefore, who wins the ANC succession battle in December 2017.